The afternoon flight was already in the sky when the man in seat 3C opened his book. He liked to read on planes. It helped him forget about the tight space, the long wait before landing, and the quiet hum of the engines. He sat near the front of the cabin, close enough to hear the soft sounds from the galley, but far enough that he still felt tucked into his own small world. The aisle beside him stayed busy for a while as people found their seats, stored their bags, and tried to get comfortable. After a bit, the plane settled, and everything became calm. He rested his elbow lightly on the armrest, careful not to bother the person beside him. He had learned long ago that small kindnesses mattered. His book was worn around the edges, the kind of book someone reads more than once. Now and then, he paused, not because he lost his place, but because he liked to think about what he was reading. The story gave him peace, and that peace showed in his calm face and quiet posture. Most people around him looked relaxed now that the flight had reached a steady height. A child in a few rows back peeked over the seat, then ducked down again with a shy smile. A flight attendant walked by with a patient smile, checking that everyone had their seat belts on. The lights inside the cabin were soft, the kind that made everything feel a little more gentle. He noticed details, though he never made it obvious. He saw the older couple across the aisle sharing a blanket. He saw a person with headphones tapping a foot to unheard music. He saw the way people slowly stopped thinking about the ground below and started trusting the air around them. It was a strange thing that humans could do, he thought. Sit inside a metal tube, floating miles above the world, and still find comfort in a movie, a snack, or a kind word. The man in seat 3C did not try to stand out. He liked to stay in the background. He knew what it felt like when people stared at him without knowing who he was, and he had no wish to invite that kind of attention now. He preferred to blend in, to be just another traveler trying to get somewhere. The pages of his book turned slowly, each one giving him another moment of quiet. Outside the window across the aisle, the sky stretched wide and endless. Clouds drifted below like soft hills, and streaks of light painted the horizon. It was the kind of view that made people feel small in a good way, as if the world was big enough to hold every story, every memory, every hope. Now and then, the plane shifted slightly the way planes do. A few passengers tightened their grip on the armrests. Others did not seem to notice. The man in seat 3C barely looked up. He was used to the movement. To him, this small shake meant nothing more than a tiny reminder that the sky was alive. He took a deep breath and slowly let it out. He was not thinking about work or bills or deadlines. He was not thinking about the past either. He was simply there on that plane in that seat, turning pages. It was a gift to have quiet time like that, and he knew it. Then the soft buzz of the intercom came on. It was a familiar sound, the kind that usually meant the captain was about to talk about the weather or how much time was left before landing. People barely looked up at first. A few ears perked up, ready for the routine message. The man in seat 3C marked his place in the book with a finger and waited. The captain's voice came through, calm but serious. There was nothing loud or frightening in the tone. It was steady, professional, and measured. Still, the words that followed were not the kind that people heard on most flights. The captain asked if there were any combat-trained pilots on board and, if so, could they please make themselves known to the crew. The cabin shifted in mood, almost like the air had changed temperature. People looked up. Heads turned. Eyes searched the rows as if the answer might be printed on someone's shirt. There was no panic, just quiet confusion and a low stir of whispers. Some passengers gave small nervous laughs, as if unsure what else to do. Others looked straight ahead, not wanting to imagine what the request might mean. The man in seat 3C did not move right away. He sat still for a moment, letting the words repeat in his mind. Combat-trained pilots. It was not something that came up often in everyday life. It was not something most people could claim to be. But he understood the request in a way only a few people in the world could. It was like a distant echo of a life that felt far away and yet somehow close enough to touch. He closed his book gently. His eyes softened, and for a brief second, his expression changed. There was something deeper there, like the surface of a calm lake reflecting a sky that held both light and storms. He remembered long days of training, countless hours in the sky, and the weight of knowing that every decision mattered. He remembered noise and silence, fear and confidence, risk and trust. He remembered the responsibility of sitting in a cockpit, where focus and calm were not choices, but necessities. Around him, the whispers grew slightly. A few passengers looked toward the front of the plane, curious. A person across the aisle shrugged, unsure what to think. The flight attendant walked by again, smiling in a way that tried to reassure everyone even though she seemed a little more alert now. The man in seat 3C thought about staying quiet. He had learned how to step back from attention, how to keep his history private, how to carry his past lightly. But he also thought about the tone of the captain's voice. Calm, yes, but there was a quiet urgency hidden inside it, like someone asking for help without wanting to alarm anyone. His heart stayed steady. He did not rush. He simply considered. Was he ready to step back into that role, even for a moment? Was he willing to stand up, walk down the aisle, and remind the world that he once carried that kind of training inside him? He looked down at his hands. They were steady. He looked at the book. It would wait. He looked around the cabin at people who did not know his story and did not need to. They were families, students, workers, travelers, dreamers. They were people trusting that somewhere behind a closed door, skilled hands and calm minds were guiding them home. He did not think of himself as a hero. He did not think of the situation as dramatic. He simply felt a quiet sense of duty, the same kind he had carried for years. It was not about being brave. It was about being there if he was needed. So he lifted his hand slightly to get the attention of the nearest flight attendant. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand up in a bold gesture. He simply spoke in a calm, respectful tone, explaining that he might be able to help. The flight attendant listened carefully, her eyes widening just a little with relief. She thanked him softly, as if even her gratitude needed to be gentle in that moment. She asked him to wait for a moment while she spoke to the rest of the crew. He nodded, and then he sat back, not reading his book, not thinking about the clouds or the view, but sitting with the quiet weight of the moment. The hum of the engines continued, steady and constant. The plane flew on, a small piece of metal crossing a giant sky, filled with people who did not yet know that something unusual had just begun. In seat 3C, the man rested his hands on his knees and waited, calm as ever, ready to do whatever was asked of him, even if he hoped the need would turn out to be small. The flight attendant returned a few minutes later, walking with that same calm smile, but this time there was a new sense of purpose in her step. She leaned slightly toward the man in seat 3C and spoke in a quiet voice so the people around them would not worry. She thanked him again and said the captain would like to see him near the front. There was no rush in her tone, no panic, only respect and care. He nodded once and stood up slowly, careful not to bump the seat in front of him. The people nearby noticed, but no one said anything. They only watched with curious eyes, wondering what was happening but trusting the crew to handle it. He gave a small, polite smile to the person in the aisle seat as he stepped past, as if he were simply going to stretch his legs. Walking toward the front of the plane felt strangely familiar and new at the same time. He had walked narrow aisles before, felt the sway of the aircraft under his feet, heard the same steady hum of engines. But back then, he had not been a passenger. He had been in the seat where the responsibility rested, where every choice mattered. He took a quiet breath, letting those memories float back without letting them overwhelm him. The curtain near the front of the plane opened, and a member of the crew guided him forward. They spoke softly, asking gentle questions to confirm his background. He did not brag or overstate anything. He simply explained that he had flown in the past, that he had trained for difficult situations, and that he understood what it meant to stay calm when others needed reassurance. His voice was steady, grounded. It was the voice of someone who had learned how to trust both knowledge and instinct. As they spoke, small memories rose in his mind like scenes from an old film. He remembered long days of training where the sky felt endless and the ground felt distant. He remembered the first time he handled turbulence so strong it made the aircraft shake, and how he learned that fear could be quiet if he treated it with respect rather than denial. He remembered the weight of the headset on his ears, the feel of the controls beneath his hands, the trust placed in him by everyone who climbed aboard. He did not think about glory or adventure. He thought about safety. He thought about the people who looked to the cockpit as a place where calm lived. He thought about how every passenger, from the child with the blanket to the older couple across the aisle, carried their own hopes and plans. Each of them had someone waiting at the other end of the flight, or a reason to travel that mattered deeply to them. That was what always stayed with him. The fact that flying was not about the aircraft, but about the lives inside it. The crew guided him to a jump seat for a moment while they communicated with the cockpit. He waited, hands folded loosely, posture relaxed. He did not pry for details, and no one offered more than needed. There was an unspoken respect in that quiet space, a kind of understanding that this moment mattered and should be handled with care. While he waited, he reflected on the path that had brought him here. There had been years of discipline, of learning how to listen more than he spoke, of understanding that confidence did not mean loudness. He had learned to carry himself with quiet dignity, even when others did not always see it. He had learned to stay patient with the world, even when it felt easier to rush. Those lessons had followed him long after he stopped flying professionally. They were part of who he was now, woven into every choice he made. He remembered times after his service when people were surprised to learn about his past. They expected a different story, a different face, a different life. Sometimes they apologized when they realized their assumptions had been wrong. Sometimes they simply grew quiet. He never let bitterness grow from those moments. Instead, he chose to let his actions speak when they needed to. Right now, that choice felt more important than ever. A flight attendant returned and spoke to him again in a low tone. The cockpit crew wanted to talk with him directly. There was no drama in the explanation, only clarity. One of the pilots was not feeling well, and while the situation was under control, the captain wanted to be sure every resource was available. It was a careful decision, not a fearful one. That made him respect the captain even more. He followed the attendant toward the small, reinforced door at the front of the cabin. Most passengers watched without staring, sensing that something important, but handled, was happening. The door opened briefly and closed again behind him, and just like that, he was in the tiny world where the aircraft was guided. The cockpit felt both familiar and updated. Screens glowed softly with information. Buttons and switches sat in neat rows. The captain greeted him with gratitude in their eyes, offering a professional handshake. The atmosphere inside the cockpit was calm, but focused. There were no raised voices, no rushing, only teamwork. They spoke in the language of aviation. Clear, direct, measured. He explained his experience without embellishment. The captain described the condition of the co-pilot, who needed to step back and rest for safety reasons. The aircraft systems were fine. The route ahead looked stable. The weather was manageable. But an extra trained mind and set of eyes could make all the difference. He felt the old rhythm return, like a song he had not heard in years but still remembered the words to. Not because he wanted control, but because responsibility had always sat comfortably on his shoulders when it came to keeping others safe. He offered support in whatever way the captain felt best. He understood hierarchy. He understood respect. And he understood that the most important thing was working together, not standing alone. For a moment, he thought of the people still sitting in their seats, unaware of the details, trusting strangers they would likely never meet again. He thought of the simple courage it took just to travel, to put faith in others. That trust meant something, and he felt honored to help protect it. The captain asked him a few more questions about procedures and recent experience, ensuring that everything was not only remembered, but truly understood. He appreciated that care. It showed a commitment to doing things the right way. Every word exchanged in that cockpit carried weight, not because of fear, but because of respect for the craft and the people depending on them. As they spoke, the man realized something else. He had changed since his days of regular flight duty. He was older now. He had seen more of the world from the ground than from the sky in recent years. He had learned patience in new ways, learned how to let go of control when life called for it. Yet even with all that change, part of him still understood the sky like an old friend. He also understood something deeply human. that sometimes the right thing to do is simply to say, "I am here if you need me." There was nothing dramatic about his presence there. No bright spotlight, no loud announcement. Just three people in a quiet cockpit, doing their best to guide a plane safely across the sky. The captain remained in command. The man in seat 3C became a steady support, ready to assist if circumstances required it. He looked out the small window ahead. The sky stretched out in front of them, soft and wide. Clouds drifted past like slow-moving thoughts. The earth below remained hidden, but he knew it was there, like a promise. Inside he felt calm. Not excited, not afraid, just steady. He knew that calm was a gift he had learned through years of practice, through mistakes, through times when he had struggled and grown. And now, that calm might help others without them ever knowing. Back in the cabin, people went on with their lives in that quiet way travelers do. Someone ordered a drink. Someone adjusted a blanket. Someone looked out the window and smiled. None of them knew exactly what was happening at the front of the plane, and that was all right. They did not need to worry, and that was the goal. The man in seat 3C, now seated in the jump seat for a moment, thought about how strange life could be. One minute he had been reading a book, lost in a story. The next, he had become part of a different kind of story, one that involved real people, real choices, and real trust. He did not think of it as fate or luck. He thought of it as simply being present when needed. He reflected, too, on the quiet strength it takes to step forward without shouting, to help without seeking praise, to answer a call that few people ever hear. He did not see himself as special because of it. He saw himself as someone who had been given certain skills and who now had a chance to use them again, gently and responsibly. The captain checked in with him one more time, asking how comfortable he felt with everything being discussed. He answered honestly and clearly. Honesty, he knew, was one of the most important tools in any cockpit. There was no room for ego, only truth. Together, they made a simple decision. He would stay nearby, ready to assist if needed. He would not take over. He would not step beyond what was appropriate. He would simply be there, a quiet presence, a steady backup, another mind thinking carefully about the safest way forward. He felt a small sense of gratitude, not for the situation itself, which he would have preferred to stay simple, but for the chance to be useful in a way that still felt deeply connected to who he was. He had spent years building that part of himself, and it meant something that it still mattered. As the plane continued its flight path through the soft layers of cloud, he allowed himself a small smile, not a smile of pride, but of peace. He knew that whatever happened next, he would meet it with calm. He would move with care. He would remember that every life on board was someone's whole world. And for now, that was enough. The small space at the front of the plane felt quieter than the rest of the cabin, even though the same engines hummed outside and the same air moved through the vents. The man who had once been in seat 3C now sat where only a few people ever sat, behind the closed door that most passengers never saw open. He watched the captain move with careful hands, each motion steady and thoughtful, like someone who knew the value of calm. There was no panic here, only focus. The co-pilot, who had not been feeling well, was resting with eyes closed, breathing slow and even. A member of the crew stayed nearby to make sure help would be ready if needed when they landed. The captain had already contacted the ground to let them know the situation. Everything was done with order, step by step, in the same way that flying itself worked best, through patience and respect for the process. The man who had been reading in seat 3C did not try to take control. He did not even want to. He understood that in this space, trust flowed both ways. The captain trusted him enough to invite him in, and he trusted the captain enough to follow their lead. He took a supportive role, asking quiet questions at the right times, checking details, confirming information, and offering what he remembered from his years in the sky. He noticed how many things were the same. The way the screens glowed with soft light. The steady numbers and lines that told a story only trained eyes could read. The sound of switches clicking into place. Even the silence between words felt familiar, full of understanding rather than emptiness. He also noticed what felt different. The technology had changed in small ways. Displays were cleaner. Some buttons had moved. Systems now helped with tasks that once had to be done by hand. But the heart of it all had not changed. Planes still needed guidance. A landing still needed care. And calmness still mattered more than anything. The captain asked him to help monitor a few key instruments as they prepared for the next phase of the flight. His eyes moved across the panels, not rushing, not lingering too long in one place, taking in the information like someone reading a language they had learned long ago. He spoke only when needed, and when he did, his voice was soft but sure. In the middle of all this, he felt an old feeling begin to return. It was not excitement. It was not fear. It was a deep, steady sense of purpose. The kind that made his breathing even, his thinking clear, his heart quiet. He remembered long nights when he had flown under a wide sky filled with stars. He remembered sunrises from the cockpit, when the horizon glowed like a promise. He remembered how, no matter what happened, the most important thing was making sure everyone on board arrived safely. He thought again of the passengers behind the door. The one who had smiled at him in the aisle. The child who peeked over the seat. The people who had drifted to sleep, trusting the sky to carry them. They did not need to know the details of what was happening. It was better if they just felt safe. That was the quiet duty of those in the cockpit, to hold the weight so others did not have to. From time to time, the captain and the man shared a brief look. No big gestures. Just the kind of glance two people share when they understand they are working toward the same goal. Trust built itself gently in those small moments, like bricks stacking one on top of another without noise. The captain went through checklists, calling out each step with clear words. The man responded when needed, confirming, supporting, staying present. He noticed how well the captain handled everything. It filled him with respect. This was not a dramatic scene from a movie. It was simply skilled people doing careful work. Outside, the clouds slowly shifted. The sky began to change color as the plane moved along its path. Far below, the ground was still hidden, but he could sense its presence, like a quiet anchor waiting for them. His thoughts drifted, not away from the moment, but gently around it. He remembered his first solo flight years ago, the mix of nerves and pride. The way he had learned that confidence did not mean never being afraid. It meant knowing what to do even when you were. He had spent a long time after leaving active flying trying to live a simple life. He read books. He worked. He spent time in ordinary moments that felt big in their own way, like cooking a meal or talking with someone he cared about. He had learned to enjoy being just another face in the crowd. And yet, here he was again, helping guide a plane through the sky. He did not see this as a sign that he should return to his old life. Instead, he saw it as a reminder that every skill we learn has a way of finding us again when it is needed. We do not always know when that moment will come. Sometimes it arrives on a quiet afternoon flight when we are halfway through a good book. He thought, too, about the simple fact that the captain had asked the question over the intercom. It took humility to reach out for help. It took wisdom to admit that an extra trained hand could make the situation stronger. He admired that. In his experience, the best leaders were the ones who understood that asking for help was not weakness. It was strength. As the plane moved forward, the cabin crew continued their work with a gentle calm. They offered drinks, blankets, and reassuring smiles. They did not share details, but they shared peace, and sometimes that was enough. Passengers continued to watch movies, read, talk quietly, or rest. The rhythm of the flight carried on. Inside the cockpit, they began to talk more about the landing ahead. They discussed the airport, the runway, the wind, and the weather. Nothing dramatic, just careful planning. The man listened closely, adding thoughts here and there, always making sure the captain stayed in charge. He remembered a saying from his training days: 2 minds, 1 goal. He noticed his hands resting quietly in his lap. They looked relaxed, but he also knew they could respond quickly if needed. Years of practice had built that readiness. Not tense, just present. Every few minutes, he checked in with himself. Am I calm? Am I clear? Am I grounded? And each time, the answer was yes. That gave him confidence. Not the loud kind, the steady kind. He thought about something else as well. How people often walk past each other every day without knowing the stories behind the faces they see. The person sitting next to you on a bus might have climbed mountains. The person behind you in line at the store might have once saved a life. The world was full of quiet stories like that. He liked the idea that heroism did not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked like a calm person in seat 3C reading a book. The captain thanked him at one point, not with big words, but with a sincere tone. He nodded in return. They both understood that gratitude did not need to be loud to be real. Time passed in that smooth, steady way it does when you are deeply focused. The sky outside shifted again. The ground would soon begin to rise in the windows ahead. The man felt ready, not tense, not eager, just ready. He knew that part 3 of the story was not about landing yet. It was about preparation, about trust, about the quiet space before an important moment when people gather their thoughts and steady their hearts. He could feel that space around him now, soft, patient, respectful. And through it all, the plane flew on, carrying hundreds of lives, each one with a story, each one with a destination, each one resting on the invisible strength of teamwork, care, and calm. The man who had once sat in seat 3C let out a slow breath he had not noticed he was holding. It wasn't a sigh, just a release, a reminder to himself to stay present, to stay grounded, to remember that he, too, was simply human doing his best in the moment he had been given. He did not know yet how the last parts of this journey would unfold, but he knew one thing for certain. He would meet whatever came next with steady hands, clear eyes, and a heart that understood the quiet power of being there when needed. The sky outside the cockpit window began to change as the plane drew closer to its destination. What had once been wide stretches of cloud and soft light now showed hints of the land below. Shapes slowly formed through the haze. Fields, roads, tiny buildings. It was like the world was rising gently to meet them. Inside the cockpit, the air felt focused but calm. The captain moved through each step with steady care. The man who had once been in seat 3C listened closely, helping when asked, speaking only when it added clarity. There was no rush in their voices, no fear, only purpose. They reviewed the plan for the landing again. The airport was ready. Emergency teams were on standby, not out of panic, but out of preparation. The co-pilot was still resting, watched over carefully by a member of the crew. Everyone was doing their part. The man looked at the captain and saw not stress, but quiet strength. They were both aware that many lives depended on the choices made in that small space. Yet they did not let that thought become heavy. They treated it with respect instead. That respect is what kept their hands steady. He glanced at the instruments again. Numbers changed slowly. Altitude lowered. Speed adjusted. Everything was under control. Still, he knew from experience that landing always required full attention. It was the moment when the sky slowly let go of the aircraft and the earth took it back. Behind the cockpit door, life continued in the cabin like a soft murmur. Some passengers stretched. Some began to gather their belongings. Others rested with eyes closed, unaware that two calm minds at the front were working together with care. One flight attendant checked on the man earlier and gave him a grateful smile. Said more than words could. He returned the smile gently. He did not need praise. He only needed to know that he was helping. He thought for a moment about how strange life could be. Just a short while ago he had been reading, lost in a story someone else had written. Now he was part of a real-life moment that none of the people on board would ever forget, even if they never knew the full details of what happened. The captain spoke with the control tower, confirming every detail. The man listened closely, the language of aviation still deeply familiar to him. The tower cleared them for approach. Wind was calm. Visibility was good. The runway stretched ahead like a silver ribbon waiting quietly. A small shift in the aircraft's angle told him they had begun their descent in earnest. He felt the change not as fear but as rhythm. The body of the plane spoke gently to those who knew how to listen. He could feel each adjustment, each correction, each movement of air around the wings. He remembered his training then, not as sharp commands but as living lessons. Stay calm. Stay present. Trust your tools. Trust your crew. Communicate clearly. respect the process. These ideas were not just about flying. They were about life. He watched the captain's hands. Smooth, confident, thoughtful, every motion intentional. He added support when asked, confirming readings, checking certain instruments, offering quiet reassurance. Together, they formed a balanced team, where ego had no place and care led the way. The plane dipped through a thin layer of clouds, and the ground came into clearer view. Roads became more than lines. Fields became patches of color. The small shapes of cars moved along highways. Houses sat quietly in neat clusters, each one holding lives full of stories and love. He thought of the people inside the plane, the family traveling together, the solo traveler lost in music, the elderly couple sharing a blanket, the young person asleep with a book on their lap. All these lives, all these hearts, resting in this moment, trusting it would end safely. That trust was powerful. It deserved to be honored. He could feel the cabin grow slightly quieter as passengers sensed they were getting closer to landing. Some people always grew thoughtful in those moments. Others gripped the armrests a little tighter. Some closed their eyes. He knew it was natural. Even those who had flown many times still felt the small mystery of leaving the sky. In the cockpit, checklists were read again. Each item confirmed with care. Communication stayed simple and clear. No one rushed. No one skipped steps. That was the beauty of good teamwork. It was steady even when the moment mattered most. The runway appeared ahead, long and straight, pointing toward them like an open hand. Lights along the sides glowed softly, guiding them home. The man felt a calm settle over him. The world outside might have looked small from up here, but the meaning of what they were doing felt big in all the right ways. He thought quietly about his own journey. About the times people had doubted him. About the times he had stayed silent rather than argue. About the moments when he had been trusted, and how deeply that trust had shaped him. He knew that life had not always been fair or easy. But here, right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was care, skill, and kindness. As they drew closer, the aircraft gently responded to the controls. It was like guiding a large, living thing that only wanted clarity. The captain spoke in a calm voice, announcing the final approach. The man supported the process, watching, checking, staying fully present. Time slowed in that way it does during important moments. The wheels lowered with a soft sound. The landing gear locked into place. The flaps extended to create more lift and drag. Every part of the plane did its job, each piece working together like a well-practiced team. He respected that harmony deeply. He could see the runway rushing toward them now, though everything still felt slow inside the cockpit. This was the quiet point where confidence mattered most. Not loud confidence. Not pride. Just the calm belief that preparation and skill would guide them safely. The man took a slow breath and let it out. Then the aircraft touched the ground. It was not dramatic. It did not slam or jolt. It simply met the earth with a firm, steady embrace. The tires rolled. The engines shifted. The plane slowed with controlled strength. The runway lights passed by in smooth lines. There was a soft tremble through the cabin, the kind people feel every time they land. Inside the cockpit, there was still no cheering. No loud celebration. Only a quiet release of tension that came not from fear but from care. The captain guided the aircraft down the runway, slowing, steering, staying focused until the plane was safely at taxi speed. Only then did the man allow himself a small smile. In the cabin behind them, some passengers clapped softly, not knowing exactly why they felt so relieved, only that they did. Others simply breathed out, happy to be closer to the ground again. The child a few rows back giggled at the strange feeling in the stomach that comes with landing. Life carried on in its small, warm ways. The captain thanked the man quietly, from the heart. Not with grand speeches. Not with heavy praise. Just with genuine appreciation. He nodded in return. That was enough. Sometimes the deepest thanks are the simplest ones. As they taxied toward the gate, the man felt a deep sense of peace. He was not thinking about being a hero. He did not see himself as someone special. He simply felt grateful that he had been able to help at a time when help was needed. He also felt grateful for the captain's wisdom, took courage to ask for help, took strength to remain composed, took kindness to treat everyone with respect. Together, they had shown that the best outcomes often come from humility and teamwork. The plane reached the gate. The engines slowly powered down. The seatbelt light would soon turn off. People would stand, stretch, reach for bags, and return to the noise and rhythm of everyday life. Most of them would never know that something unusual had happened on that flight. They would leave the plane thinking it had been just another safe journey. And in a way, that was the greatest success. The fact that their day could go on without fear or drama. The man who had started the day in seat 3C made his way back out of the cockpit quietly. He did not wish for attention. He did not need anyone to point or whisper. He just wanted to blend back into the flow of travelers. Another person with a book under his arm and a destination in his heart. A flight attendant paused for a moment and gently thanked him again, eyes warm with feeling. He smiled softly and nodded, knowing that no more words were needed. Then he returned to the aisle, back into the simple world of rolling suitcases, overhead bins, and polite smiles. He waited his turn like everyone else, moving step by step toward the exit. The engines were silent now. The door opened. Cool air from outside flowed in like a welcome greeting. And as he walked out of the plane, he did so not as a hero, not as a legend, but simply as a quiet man who had once read a book in seat 3C, and when the moment came, chose to help with calm hands and a steady heart. The cabin slowly returned to a soft, steady rhythm, but everyone could still feel a quiet weight in the air. The man in seat 3C sat back at last, the book he had been reading still resting face down on his lap as if it had been waiting for him the whole time. His hands were steady again, though a small trace of the past hour lingered in his eyes. He did not look for attention. He did not wait for applause. He simply breathed, like someone who had held his breath for far too long and was finally allowed to let it go. A few rows back, a child whispered to a parent, asking if everything was really okay. The parent nodded, smoothing the child's hair and gently pointing toward the window. Clouds drifted past like soft mountains, and the sunlight wrapped around the wings in a warm glow. It was peaceful in a way that almost felt unreal after the sudden rush and confusion that had swept through the plane not long before. People glanced at each other with new eyes. Strangers rarely share something so intense, and when they do, it changes the way they see one another, even if they never exchange a single word. The captain's voice came over the speakers again, calmer now, lighter, like someone who had set down a very heavy load. He thanked everyone for their patience. He made a small joke about smooth air and how it was his favorite kind. There was a tiny wave of soft laughter, the sort that comes from relief more than humor. No one needed a long speech. They just needed to hear that steady voice and feel that the sky was calm again. The man in seat 3C looked out the window and watched the world below shrink and stretch at the same time. Up here, cities were tiny patterns, and rivers were thin lines of silver. He thought about the strange way life works, how you can simply be reading a book, not expecting anything, and then suddenly the past you thought you had left behind comes and taps you on the shoulder. It did not arrive with noise or drama. It simply reminded him that the things you learn in hard times have a way of staying with you, ready to be used again when others may need them. A flight attendant paused beside his seat, not with a loud thank you, but with a soft smile that carried more meaning than words. She offered him a glass of water. He accepted it, nodding back. She had seen fear in people's faces before and comforted them. Today, she had watched quiet courage appear in a way that surprised even her. She kept moving down the aisle, checking on passengers, adjusting blankets, calming a few lingering anxieties with small reassurances. A few seats away, someone typed messages into a phone draft, not to send right now, no one had signal, but just to capture the feeling. It is not every day someone watches an ordinary person step into an extraordinary moment. They wrote about how calm he had been, how he listened more than he spoke, how his voice carried steadiness without trying to sound important. They didn't know anything about him except that he had been reading, and then he had been ready. And the man himself did not think of hero stories. He thought about the people who had taught him, the training sessions where he had repeated the same skills over and over until they became as natural as breathing. He thought of early mornings, late nights, and moments when fear had been real but had never been allowed to control him. He did not feel larger than life. He only felt grateful that he could help when help was needed. Time passed differently now. The minutes seemed longer but gentler too. A quiet understanding settled across the plane. Even those who hadn't fully known what was happening earlier sensed that something important had taken place. Something that reminded them how much they rely on one another, even among strangers. Near the back of the plane, an older passenger closed their eyes and rested, comforted by the silence. Just across the aisle, another person opened a notebook and began to write down thoughts before they faded. Words about being in the air, about trust, about invisible teamwork between people who may never see each other again. The seatbelt sign stayed on while the crew finished checks and procedures, but no one complained. There was a deep patience, the kind that comes when people realize that safety is not a small thing or a simple promise. The hum of the engines wrapped everyone in a steady blanket of sound, almost like a lullaby, steady and predictable. The man in seat 3C looked ahead, not backward. He did not replay every detail in his head because he had done that sort of thing many times before. He knew that the best thing now was to be present, to sit quietly, to let the world feel ordinary again. So he lifted his book, found the page where he had stopped, and smiled a little to himself when he realized he had to reread the last paragraph. It was hard to focus at first, but slowly the words sank in again, and the story on the page welcomed him back like an old friend. After a while, the captain spoke again, telling everyone they would begin their descent. People straightened in their seats, storing away electronics, adjusting seat backs, and lifting window shades. It was a familiar pattern, something they had done on many flights before. But this time, there was an added layer of appreciation. The cabin crew moved with quiet skill, their calm presence spreading like warmth. As the ground slowly rose to meet the plane, lights from the city glowed below. Roads traced golden lines, and neighborhoods sparkled like scattered jewels. The clouds thinned, and the sky softened from bright blue to a gentle, fading color that hinted at evening. The wheels touched the runway with a smooth, soft bounce, and there was another wave of quiet relief. People clapped a little, not loudly, just enough to show gratitude without breaking the peaceful spell that had settled over everyone. Taxiing felt like the last chapter of a long, unexpected story. The plane rolled gently toward the gate, and phones buzzed awake one by one. Messages flowed, updates were sent, and loved ones learned that everything was fine. Bags were shifted from under seats. Jackets were pulled on. Life was waiting on the other side of the door. The captain came out for a moment once they had parked, greeting a few passengers near the front. He did not make a big show of anything. He simply thanked them for their patience. When his eyes met the man in seat 3C, there was a quiet exchange, a nod full of respect between two people who understood the strange, shared responsibility of the sky. No long speech was needed. Gratitude spoken simply was enough. Passengers began to file out, row by row. Some gave the man in seat 3C a small smile. Others looked at him with that soft expression people wear when they want to say, "Thank you," but are not sure how to say it out loud. He returned each look with gentle kindness, not seeking recognition, just acknowledging a shared human moment. When it was his turn, he stood, slid his book into his bag, and took one last glance at the seat where he had spent the flight. It looked ordinary again, just a seat in a long row on a large plane. But he knew that sometimes ordinary places witness extraordinary calm, and that calm can steady many hearts at once. He walked up the jet bridge into the wide, bright airport. People rushed past, heading to connections, greeting waiting friends, wheeling suitcases toward baggage claim. Announcements echoed overhead, mixing with laughter, footsteps, and the rolling sound of luggage wheels. Life carried on, busy and unaware of what had happened in the sky not long before. Outside, the air was fresh, grounded, solid. The man paused for a moment, taking it in. Not to make a dramatic pause, but simply to let the weight of the day settle into memory. There was no need to dwell on it. He knew it would stay with him anyway, tucked away beside many other moments where calm and quiet courage had been enough. And for the others who had been on that flight, the story would travel home with them too. Some would share it around dinner tables. Some would tell friends in soft voices. Others would simply keep it inside. A reminder that sometimes the right person is sitting quietly nearby when things feel uncertain. No matter how they remembered it, the heart of the story stayed the same. A man was reading in seat 3C when the world briefly asked for something special from him, and he answered not with noise or grand gestures, but with steady hands, clear thoughts, and humble strength. And when it was over, he returned to his book, the sky returned to calm, and everyone landed safely back in the everyday world, carrying a small piece of that calm with them. Life went on, but a quiet truth lingered in every heart on that plane. It is not always the loudest person who makes the biggest difference. Sometimes it is the quiet one, reading in seat 3C, who rises when needed, then sits back down as if nothing unusual has happened, leaving behind a story people will remember long after the seatbelt sign turns off.